In the darkest worlds that ever were, the only thing that brings light are stories. Those stories are kept in one place, the tiny bookcase. Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Welcome to the second of 4 special episodes, our Nano season.
In these episodes, we're continuing to discuss our progress through the NaNoWriMore of 2021, chatting to people going through it as well, and reading out some snippets of story.
For this episode, we're joined by someone who claims to talk nonsense and write the same. We'll see about that.
We'd like to welcome Ross Young to the bookcase.
Hello, Ross.
Hi guys, how are you all doing?
Yeah, not bad. 11 days in at this stage, and it's a bit of a slog, I've got to say.
Were we all hitting word count on day 11?
Yeah,
Go
is everyone there?
Yeah, I think I'm actually slightly above. I think I'm rather cheekily. I think I'm a few days ahead.
I think I'm about a day and a half ahead, which means the word count's getting smaller. So if I wanted to, it could be a bit easier to hit word count.
Yeah. But 11 days in a row. I mean, I don't typically write like this. I know the last NaNoWriMore that I did, I didn't write at the weekends. And that caused a whole boatload of trouble for me in terms of, having to play catch up with the word count and getting in your head about what your target goal was for the day and that kind of business. So
I always get really overconfident by this point and think, I'm getting there, and then I hit about the midway point, and it's just such a slog. It's painful, and I fall miles behind. Yeah.
This is my first one. You're both scaring the shit out of me.
You just scared the fuck out of me. My hubris came out for a moment. I was like, oh, I'm days ahead.
It's all right. Hubris always makes for good stories.
It's an intense thing. So, as people will know from listening for the first episode of our Nano season, and just generally about NaNoWriMore, you have to write around 1,700 words a day to achieve par in order to have written 50,000 by the end of the month. So, 11 days in, I think the current total of word count, if you just hit par, is just over 18,000 words. So it's a big chunk of word. It's a big barrel load of it.
A lot of text. Yeah.
I think this is. Am I right in thinking this is the most you've ever written on one project, Nico?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
By a squillion. I normally write songs, mate. Not that long. The chorus is the same thing each time.
In terms of like prose, I think you've written a couple that have like twitched towards the 2,000.
Yeah, I've never written anything longer than a short story.
Mm.
It's always been songs and poetry, and apparently me, Mr. Cocky, thought, I can write a novel in a month.
Why not?
Let's have a try, gang. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
We're triers.
Do you find it gets more? It does literally get more words out of you, Ross, taking part.
Yeah, definitely. I think that one of the key things is that you kind of, it's quite difficult, and Nico, you'll probably find this if you normally write shorter stuff, is that you've got to be quite good at not going backwards. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So if you've started to write something, and certainly on some of the things that I've written during Nano, I've wanted to go back immediately and just go, no, that was crap. That was just crap. I want to go back and just delete that whole thing and start again, because that's something I do a lot anyway. And you can't do it if you want to keep moving forwards with Nano, and it's really hard not to do that. So sometimes they don't end up making any sense at all, because there's a chapter I know I want to delete, but I refuse to delete it because that's my word count. So I'll leave it there, and it has nothing to do with what I've written.
Got the burning sensation of a character that I'm writing, and knowing that they didn't start out exactly like this, wanting to go back and fix them, and think, no, don't do it now, because you'll create a hole for yourself to live in.
Yeah, and then it's, well, what do I tweak? Because I'm only halfway through, so I'll start tweaking little bits here, and it just cascades through everything you've done, and it's a nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare when you get to the end and want to fix it anyway. So it's just how many nightmares you want to give yourself, really.
Well, the correct answer, Ross, my friend, is the nipples. Always tweak the nipples. Right. We'll have plenty more of this fuckery later, I'm absolutely sure. But we've got some reading to do, Ben, and you're going first this time.
Yeah. So this is obviously from the same project as the one that I read out earlier in this Nano season. It's from a different character's perspective. It's a character that we haven't met yet in terms of what I've read out on the podcast. And sort of going off what you did last episode, Nick, where you sort of described a particularly interesting bit of like flora.
Yes.
There was something really early on in this project. So I think this would have been early to mid 2020 when I started to think about this, and I wrote a few things down, just sort of when you just got a bunch of ideas flying around in your head.
Yeah.
One of them was Rubik's Cube dildo, which I don't know what I was going to do with that, but there you go.
Rotate it, one would assume.
Yeah, I guess. No, and then the other thing was just the word Bloodfields. So it became part of this project from there. So that it's a sort of a bit where I guess I should put it in some context, like the prince of the story has survived an assassination attempt, and he is intending to test a theory that these fabled Bloodfields might actually be useful to him in a war that he's fighting at the moment to defend his kingdom. So I think that's probably all we need to know, but I shall go from there. The mountain air chilled his lungs with every breath as Prince Averin studied the empty meadowland before him. The moon's silvery light illuminated the low-lying plant life that was the reason he had risked bringing his army to this forsaken place. Behind him, that army was spread out wide in a wild, rock-strewn woodland. Their cooking fires were a thick line of light which gave an extra dimension of shadow to the eerily empty stretch of ground known as the Bloodfields. Averin heard the sound of a man in armour approaching, but did not turn to look. Sir Blythe came to stand next to his prince. "Shall I fetch them, my liege?" "Yes," Averin nodded, and he knew it was time to see whether the stories told of the fields were mere hearsay or something useful. The man's chainmail clinked as he walked back towards the camp, and Averin allowed his mind to drift forwards in time, to imagine the battle lines he would call for when the army of Basingard arrived. Goyan was no fool. He would send as much of his army across the safe path on the southern cliff top as possible. As such, the prince knew he would need to make that journey as unappealing as he could, with stout and brutal defence works. Averin's main force would be drawn up within 20 feet of the meadow's edge, partially protected by the tree line. Averin saw where he would place his archers adjacent to those men, slightly closer to the meadow and seemingly in harm's way. Goyan was known to charge unguarded archers with cavalry, a lesson he had taught Averin's father on more than one occasion. Averin thought that this place would be the perfect time to return the favour to Goyan, if the Bloodfields worked. Averin's musings on the coming battle were interrupted by the return of Blythe. He was not alone. With the old knight came several of Averin's other commanders and 2 pairs of soldiers. Between the men, held tightly, were the traitors. Sir Linar and Sir Yaxley had seen better days. Though the wounds they had sustained during their assassination attempt on Averin had been treated, both men were ruined by their failure. Someone had also taken the liberty of stripping them of their clothes, so that they shivered in the night's chilly air. Averin kept his face impassive as he studied the 2 beaten men. "Any words for your last moments?" said Averin, looking at each of them. "Only," stammered Yaxley, "only to beg for the lives of my family." His bloodshot eyes stared at Averin in the moonlight as he cradled his stump of a forearm. "My daughter and my son knew nothing of my actions, and I beg you to spare them." Averin waited a moment, allowing his words to drift on the mountain winds. "Agreed. I have met them. They are in Darbury?" "Yes." "Then you must also hope that your treachery has not already sealed their fate. And from you, Linar." "Sir Linar, whatever else I may be, I am still a knight." "Your oaths included ones of loyalty, You lost your title and honour the moment you entered my tent with a drawn dagger. My oath was to the people of Wickland, not to an arrogant princeling who knows nothing of loss. There, you have my words. I hope Goyhan guts you, runt." Well put. Prince Averin bared his teeth in a mirthless grin at the narrow-faced knight before nodding to the soldiers that held the man. "Do it." The soldiers dragged the 2 naked traitor knights forwards. When they reached the edge of the squat plant life, they stopped and heaved the prisoners forwards so that the men tumbled and crashed through the low-lying plants that dominated the meadow. The soldiers quickly retreated and took up positions by the prince and the commanders. Yaxley was the first to his feet. He used his one remaining hand to push himself up quickly. The big man stared at the foliage around him, eyes wide with fear. Averin watched as the plants began to puff up where they'd been crushed by his movements. Those swollen pustules quickly burst to jettison a cloud of dense vapour. The strange stuff clung to Yaxley and seemed to rise with every hyperventilating breath he took. Linar, rather than get to his feet immediately, began to scramble away from Yaxley on his hands and knees. Gradually, his clumsy motions brought him up into a stumbling run. With every bare footfall, he left another stamped patch on the plant matter of the strange meadow. He made it 20 yards before falling with a yelping scream. Averin could see that he had stepped on the partially decayed ribcage of a deer. One of the shards of bone had gone straight through his foot. He lay there, gripping the wound for a long moment, before trying to move again. The plants around him came to life, their dark colours growing more vibrant as the blood ran from his pierced foot. Averin thought he could see a ripple of reactions from the flora that surrounded the men. Plants that had not been trodden on began to puff up and release their clouds, until Linar was nearly shrouded from view by the stuff that hung around him, dense as a fog. Meanwhile, Yaxley was shuddering as the stuff poured into his nose and mouth. He began screaming and flailing, like a man trying to swat away a swarm of bees. Then his back arched and he stood strangely still. Linar began screaming as well, and Averin watched Yaxley's head snap in that direction. Heedless of the plants now, Yaxley covered the ground between himself and Linar with terrifying speed. The 2 men collided in a clash of flesh. Their bodies were made silver by the moon as they tore at each other. The men that had given their lives over to martial training and excellence fought like rabid beasts. Prince Averin saw Linar push his clawing fingers through Yaxley's eyes. Yaxley, who barely reacted to the savage blinding, reached down to where Linar's sack was held sticky with sweat against his thigh. He grasped the man's bollocks and tore them from his body. Hot blood flooded Linar's pubic region, and the man fought on seemingly without pain. One of the soldiers by Averin threw up on his boots at the sight of the open wound. Linar's fingers hooked around the interior of Yaxley's eye sockets and dragged the larger man within range of his teeth. With a vicious, dragging bite, he tore out the side of Yaxley's thick neck. The 2 men were painted dark by each other's blood now. Yaxley raised his big arms and slammed them down on Linar. With each blow that landed, Averin could hear bones snapping, and then Linar's arms went limp as his collarbones were smashed. Averin watched, unable to blink, as Yaxley's blows beat Linar to the ground. Those big arms buckled the smaller man's ribcage and shattered his facial bones. Both men were making hideous wailing noises as they wordlessly mauled each other. Gradually, their violence slowed as their life's blood left them to feed the plant life around them, which seemed to greedily absorb it. Linar was the first to grow still, his ruined bones poked through ragged flesh. Yaxley tried to stand once and took a tottering step towards Averin, before collapsing. He gave one final shout of rage which choked as the last of his blood gushed from his torn throat, and then lay still next to his former comrade in arms. "So much for hearsay," said Averin, breaking the horrified silence.
Well, that went from gouging to gelding. I can't
Gouging
even
to
speak
gelding.
after that. From gouging to gelding very quickly.
It did, yes.
And an efficient, if impromptu, gelding, I must say. I'm very impressed.
It just tore it straight from his body, yeah. It was partially inspired by the way that chimpanzee can fuck somebody up. Because they just take things from people if they're in the wrong mood, including their faces and balls.
Legitimately really freaked out by that chimp thing.
Yeah, no,
Which
it's
may explain why that
absolutely terrifying.
resonated with me. Because they'll like eat your fingers and stuff to stop you getting them.
Yeah, they take things from you that they think are important to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, that went very dark. It started out quite I wouldn't say gentle, but it started out setting the tone for what was coming, but it went very dark. Yeah, bollock ripping off. That'll stay with me a while, thanks.
Don't worry about it, man. Happy to oblige. Yeah, that was I think I did cheekily do a little bit of an edit on that one whilst I was writing it. I wrote this section earlier this week, and I think I initially used the word testicles, but it didn't look right on the page.
Yeah.
And I actually sort of don't feel like bollocks is right either. And I'm not entirely sure. I know I've talked about him to death a bit on this podcast, but Joe Abercrombie uses the term fruits to describe balls.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like I need to look for some kind of synonym that is immediately recognizable like that.
I think we need to have you run this sentence with a few. Try with cojones.
Cojones, yeah.
It's a difficult one because you've got to fit it in with the language of your characters, and you've got knights speaking in a certain formal tone, and then to throw bollocks in there in the battle, it didn't jar, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
That it doesn't quite fit, which is it's very different if you had everyone talking in a more modern tone.
Yeah.
But bollocks.
Scrote might work.
Say again. Scrote.
Scrote, yeah. Tore a scrote off, yeah.
Scrote, yeah. I was thinking also like manhood. It sort of implies taking.
That implies the cock as well.
Root and stem, yeah.
Yeah, root and stem, nicely put.
Thanks for tuning into the Dick Removal podcast.
I actually can't claim credit for that one. Actually, sorry, that's a line from Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
So I can't put that in. I will be sued.
I think it needs something more visceral than manhood, though.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm finding interesting about this is that I've heavily veered away from this because you picked up on them being knights and this kind of thing. I've quite heavily veered away from the idea of knighthood and the Sir stuff as the book has gone on from this point. So it feels kind of strange to go back and read it out with that stuff still in place. And I hadn't quite realised how sort of important it is, at least to the character of Selena.
I liked how much of a twat he was in this scene. Awful, yeah, he really was. He did. And it's quite impressive to have that just in that one bit, dislike someone that instantly. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's got that good old-fashioned fantasy world thing of, oh, clearly everyone's a prick, but you have to be to survive this world.
Yeah, I mean, it's like obviously the prince himself is doing something extremely amoral here, using live prisoners to test a theory.
You can't rightly test it on dead prisoners, Ben.
Well, there we go. You see, there is more that hangs in the balance.
Or that ceases to hang in the balance. As
yeah. But yeah, this I sort of wanted to get across this idea that I liked the idea of using a fantastical bit of flora. So in this case, these like plants on this blood field in a military context. Because this character that we're following here, Prince Averin, his storyline is quite heavily dominated by this kind of like fantasy, medieval-esque warfare.
Yeah.
So him trying to use it as a build it into his battle plan was something that I sort of wanted to explore, which is what's happening here. This is him testing his theory, as I say, and he's already gambled on this possibility, and as the book goes on, we see the battle that happens on this horrifying field, which
it's a great concept of the plan, because it's much more of a science fiction idea that's used than it is in fantasy realms. In general terms, I really like the idea of the terrifying vegetation and the exploding spores kind of thing that you had going on that infected them. That was really good.
Thank you.
It was quite different. I like the idea. It's really good.
Once again, excellent use of colour as well. we had all the purple line, the thing you read last week, but
Yeah, we did.
that transition, that literal transition from light to dark in the men as they underwent that change from having humanity to the complete loss of it was really effective, I'd say.
I'm
Keep
glad.
that shit up.
Yes, well, I will.
More colour stuff. I want a full swatch, a Dulux swatch by the end.
Give me something else to write for next time. Yellow? Should I have something yellow?
Yeah, go on.
Hey, lovely. Right. Well, I'm glad that seems to have gone down fairly well. I think it needs some polishing like everything else, but there we go.
Thus is Nano.
Thus is Nano, indeed. So, Ross, I think you've got some stuff. Is it from this Nano that you've got stuff from, or was it from a previous
Yes,
one?
no, this is from this Nano. This is a project. I have this habit of and people who know me know about this as well. I have this habit of writing entire books and then deleting them intentionally because I want to rewrite them. And so it's a bit of a cheat. This one is. I know that sounds horrific, but it's because essentially I'll do something like Nano where I'll smash out the entire book as quickly as I can. I know it's not very good, but this is my version of plotting. I'm a complete pantser or a discovery writer. I like to pretend.
That's a nice way of putting it. A discovery writer. I like that.
It's nicely pretentious.
Yeah, I think that's why I like
it. So I do that sometimes, and this one I had written a book based on the character that I'm about to read, but I decided that the book that I'd written with this character in it was just a bit one dimensional for me. It just didn't have enough about it. I guess I was bored of it. There's another way of putting it. When I was writing it, it's the story worked, but I wasn't very interested. So I decided to take the character and make it about two characters instead. I'm terrible for jumping around different points of view. So it's Nano's just making it even more all over the shop, to be honest. But I'm actually working on two projects at the same time for Nano, which is definitely cheating. But it does make it a bit easier to hit the word count as well. So I can't decide if this is an opening scene of the book or the second chapter. Right now it's the second chapter, and I'm not going to move it because it's Nano and I'm not allowed to. But this is our introduction to a character who is. I'll give away the spoiler now. It's not actually in this chapter, but she is a older woman who has spent her life as a kind of a mystic, helping people. So it's set in the present day. And it turns out that she was actually supposed to be basically Buffy, but now she's in her 60s and nobody came to find her. So she spent her life just doing odd jobs. And she's quite miserable and bitter, but all of my characters are. So that's quite standard. Okay, so I'm going to try and read this. I'm not looking forward to this bit, but it'll be fine. She reached out and, gripping it between her thumb and forefinger, snapped the fairy's neck. Oh, starting with the brutal execution of a fairy makes her look bad. Don't worry, nobody else could see it. She looked like she was inspecting flowers, but she couldn't even tell you what they were. Flowers with petals. As she crouched down at the back of the garden, her employers watched from their patio, the doors wide open as they peered at the strange mystic lady shuffling through their manicured flower beds. The house looked like every other one of the eerily familiar estate of new-build carbon copies. Calling her for help was an act of desperation that the neighbors would never know about. Right, all done, she said, putting the fairy in her pocket. It was dead and it wouldn't be springing back to life, like the villain in a classic action film, only to be shot by the policeman who was gun-shy. That's a specific film reference. It's okay if you don't know it. That's it, the man said. He was early 30s, and judging by his tie, haircut, pressed trousers, and the incessant checking of his phone, a loyal follower of the corporate lifestyle. Hanging around in the back of the garden is supposed to have done something that thousands of pounds from the top specialists in the country couldn't. No offence, but I think I'll put my faith in the IVF clinic. The woman shrugged. I guess you'll find out. She wasn't going to argue with Captain Corporate Drone. She was confident he had the kind of imagination that gets excited about the pineapple on pizza debate, because he'd conducted research and knew his stuff. The man who agreed to pay some weirdo on the internet to conduct a conception investigation for his wife. Not an arsehole, as such, just normal. And lo, the world was met with humdrummery and naught of consequence, and so they dived into screens and closed their eyes to the suffering of others. Well, I can't do it all for you, she said with a smile. I haven't got all the equipment. Well, what else do you need? The woman who hired her asked. The lady of the house plays meek and subservient, but if you paused outside their front door for a moment longer than expected, you'd hear a different side to her. Be under no illusions. She was the power in this household. The woman in the garden liked her. I was being funny. She was being rude. I mean, the next bit is all up to you two. To be fair, she was wondering if Captain Corporate had the necessary equipment either. Oh, the lady of the house said. Ha, he said. He said it. There was no laugh there, just the uncomfortable, please don't put more pressure on me. Look, I don't expect you to believe in it, but there is a demon in your garden. You might call it a fairy. It's pretty common in these new estates. They feed off sexual energy. You don't want the specifics of this, trust me. Now it's gone. You banished it with magic? She asked, eyes like saucers as she stared at the strange visitor. She might have called for help just to annoy him. Sure, the woman in the suitably mystic attire said, because saying, nah, I just snapped the little fucker's neck doesn't go down well. Bullshit, Captain Corporate said. But she was familiar with this situation. The moment when the skeptic, and to be fair, that should be pretty much everyone, makes it clear that there's no evidence and this person bumbling around in the undergrowth is a time waster, a chancer. She didn't have an issue with the charlatans. Most of them put a lot more effort into convincing people that all this stuff was real than she did. In a way, they're doing a public service by keeping the idea that there might be supernatural forces in people's minds. No, charlatans, terrible people they might be, are not something you would hear her complaining about. Being accused of one was annoying, but she'd done her job. You expect me to pay some weird woman to poke around in my garden? You can fuck, she put up a hand. It wasn't a magic trick, but he stopped talking. Basic psychology. She was 5'2" in her shoes. They're not heels. But the point is, she was little, and not in good shape either. Well, unless that shape is a plump pear. Mr. Stockton, I don't have any desire to argue with you about whether what I have done is real. However, you will find that what I actually charge for is dramatic counselling. You are, he said. The change in his stance less than subtly suggested he decided it was time he showed, metaphorically at least, that he had the equipment that had been brought into question. It was time to watch the man being manly. So you're not going to pay me to kill a fairy that's been cock-blocking you. You're paying me to give some dramatic counselling to your wife. Think of it as performance therapy. Oh, that's clever, the lady of the house said. You can't deny that she came to the house and put on a performance, can you, Derek? He released the huffy sigh people develop in their teens, the one that's supposed to be left there. Their guest made a show of looking at the time on her phone as if she was in a hurry to get somewhere. She was not. She had nowhere to be and nobody to be there with. But he noticed, and he was in a rush. Fine. How much do we owe you? Twat, she thought, and almost said. He knows exactly what he owes her. 80 quid. I've only got 50 on me, he said. Cheap twat. That's okay. I can take payment online or by card. Her grin made it clear she enjoyed saying that. In a moment, she's gone from the lives of the Stocktons and has no intention of ever returning. Years later, they'll talk about how they were so desperate to have a child that they paid a weird mystic lady to come to their house. Did it work? Friends will ask. Did it bollocks? They'll reply. Except when they're alone, with that one friend who talks about something odd, a little strange, just not quite right. They'll see things differently. Ah, you're wondering about the dead fairy? No? Maybe you should. It's not every day you hear about someone putting a dead demon in their pocket. Demons are fairies and fairies are demons. It's all part of the same messed up circle of things. Nasty little critters.
That was excellent. I really got carried away with that. Very very nicely read as well. But the turns of phrase and the inner monologue of the elderly, well not elderly, but sort of like late middle aged mystic.
Yeah, I've actually struggled with that. Are we elderly or middle aged? Um, but yeah, thank you very much.
Aging. We'll go with aging.
Aging
Yeah,
mystic. There you go. Yeah. But the characterization was so vibrant. The three characters in that scene, well, four technically with the fairy, really jumped off the metaphorical page in this instance for us just listening to it. It's
Thank you.
very clear. Yeah, and lots of great turns of phrase.
Really good narrator voice as well as the internal narration as well.
Mm,
The
yeah,
straight away from but don't worry, nobody else could see it.
yeah,
When you killed the fairy, just it's cool. So you're that kind of narrator. You're the aiding and
Yeah.
abetting kind of narrator. I see.
and the sort of the pop culture references from the narrator was also the narrator's voice anyway was also quite interesting. Like the Die Hard reference and um the sort of references to the way that like social media debates happen and this kind of thing. It was fascinating. Felt very much like a fresh voice.
Oh, good. That's awesome. That's really nice to hear. That is something that I've gone around a little bit about is finding the voice that you want to actually speak to the reader, and it's quite an interesting one.
Mm,
I think that I think with Nano in particular, I found it easier just to decide that that's the voice from the beginning. Am I going to tell you the story, or am I going to be the step back and let the story tell itself, or is it going to be somebody who actually is in your face? And I, this one, I went backwards and forwards about having it in first person before I started, but because I jump around with the characters a lot, I didn't want to lose that by maintaining being first person. You can't do, or I can't do, point of view shifts if I'm doing it in first person.
yeah.
I get confused myself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. I very much struggle with it.
I think there's
Um,
a very strong comedic element as well that you would lose. That
yes.
does a lot to make those little dips into darkness, like you saying at the end, fairies are demons and demons are fairies. When it snaps back into that serious, oh, and by the way, the magic is very powerful, and here's why. You go, oh no, I better pay attention to this bit because that's not a joke anymore. So I think it
Oh yeah,
narratively really pays off.
no, brilliant. That's yeah. I hadn't actually thought about it like that, but yeah, thank you.
Um, the I'm a big fan of magical realism, as I find it really fun whenever it crops up in literature, and I thought this was a really good example of it. This juxtaposing the descriptions of the fairy and the mystic with these carbon copy new builds, and it having an appreciable effect on a couple's chances of getting pregnant, and the stuff about the IVF not having worked, and but they just needed to get rid of the fairy in the garden. Fantastic. It's immediately hooked me. I would really like to read the rest of that novel. So you're gonna have to finish it.
Yeah, if you could crack on and give us the rest of that one,
Yeah,
that'd be
just
grand.
give me to the end of the month. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah. Thank you
What?
very much.
No, no worries, man. What do you actually make of the 50,000 word goal? Because although that is the sort of start of where something technically becomes a novel, do your do your books tend to be a bit longer than that?
This is it's an endless debate about how many words do actually make a book, but
Mm.
um I'm really black and white about it though. 90,000 words makes a book. Um, that's my belief in it, and I aim for to make sure that I'm around about the 90,000 mark at least before I start editing back, because I do overwrite. I go out of my way to tell a joke, so I will lose an entire chapter just because I wanted to put in one silly pun or gag,
Yeah,
um, and I'm conscious of that, but I don't want to stop myself from doing that when I'm writing. So if I'm writing and I think that something's going to hit, only say Nano, that I'm only going to hit the 50,000 words, then I know that's not going to end up being a novel. And I think that it's for me, Nano is a planning thing. It's
yeah,
write out what you need for the story and then go back to it. I think that um, hitting that 50,000 words means you've got the skeleton of a novel, rather than the full story. There's definitely going to be elements I think that need to be added and things that are missing. Um, but if it is complete and you've got a 50,000 word story, then get to editing that. That's still a novella that you've got in there.
yeah.
Um, but I think that you would struggle to walk away with 50,000 words. Go, right, okay, I've got a 50,000 word novel here, because in the way that it works is that you would struggle to get a 50,000 word novel published traditionally. So I think that you've got to accept that that's not really a novel. Which I'm not
Yeah.
sure people will like me saying, but I don't think that 50,000 words is really a novel. Obviously, there are some fantastic classics, really famous novels out there that are 50,000 words, so there's no rule. But I just think that in today's market, which is something that we have to be aware of, that 50,000 words in general isn't considered a novel. So I walk away with it with what I consider to be a skeleton for what I'm doing. But by that point, I have fleshed out my characters. I know who the villains are. I know what the big plot twists are. And I definitely got something that I'm happy with normally by the 50,000 mark. Because if I know I'm not going to be happy with it, I don't make it to 50,000.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah, no, that was really eloquently put. I think I do agree with you. I know for the project that I'm doing, I'm aiming for about somewhere between 90 and 100,000 words. And that it feels like that would be enough words to tell the story. Yeah, so I do agree. I do agree. That's wonderful. That was excellent. Thank you for reading for us and taking us through your process there. That's really cool.
Great. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Well, we've got a third one. We'll see what Nico's been doing. Are you going to be reading from the same project as you were at the start in the first episode, Nico?
I am. The adventures of our little goblins go on.
Excellent.
So to set the scene a little bit, this is a bit further into the book. The not quite a whole novel. We'll have to keep going after NaNoWriMore. I'm going to try not to let that haunt me. But there's a character named Gadrock Skullcrusher, who is an orc warlord who's in the middle of having his mid-war crisis. So he's
Brilliant.
He's been at war for some time, and he's starting to wonder if maybe there's more to life than just raising villages and trampling people. So earlier in the book, he's sent Prig, who is claiming to be an expert on humans, to begin peace negotiations with the human world on his behalf. And this is us coming back to him a little bit later. I think the most important thing, really, is understanding the dichotomy between a human soldier and the orc warrior. Why do we fight, the man? For coin? For honour? Why do the orc fight? Skullcrusher sipped from his heavy goblet of ale. Well, him fight 'cause it's bloody brilliant, isn't it? He fed himself the lie, which he'd been doing again and again over the past few days. It wasn't that he didn't like battles anymore or anything, but that little voice at the back of his head that kept telling him there was probably more to life than this had escalated to the point where he was developing hobbies, and perhaps more frightening when they come from 8 feet of green muscle, philosophies. Turning, he looked for a witty retort he was pretty certain wasn't coming from the orc shield maiden in her early 20s, lounging on his pile of sleeping furs, whose name, as well as he could remember it, was Grog. A human equivalent would likely be Brandy, but I wouldn't go calling her that if you like your legs being attached. She wasn't too young. She was old enough to go to war, and had her own smashing stick and everything, but she was almost certainly too young for him. The general rule, reader, is to half your age and add 7 to it. Any number lower than this would be, while not against the rules, generally a bit weird. There is no cap on going upwards, and quite often can be an excellent way to learn new things. Be aware, though, you won't enjoy everything you learn, otherwise geography lessons wouldn't be allowed to exist. He let out a rumbling cough, hoping to notify her that he'd finished his sentence. Yeah, battle was really good, she said, in a distracted, I only caught that last bit kind of way. Are we going out tonight? I'm so bored of being in this stupid tent. Skullcrusher was starting to feel pretty certain she was only interested in him for his amassed hoards. After all, they didn't have very much in common, save both being orcs. The uneducated human would say, well, that's enough, isn't it? To that human, we say ha, and also no. Imagine for a moment you were told to have a conversation with a dinner lady you've never met, a professional chess player, and a teenager who's just discovered the art of being a snide little sod. While, on their own, these people are all human, and probably have interesting stories to tell or viewpoints to share, it doesn't mean they will automatically get on, or have anything in common. Try to think like that more often, and get to know some dinner ladies. They see all sorts. Absent-mindedly, Skullcrusher fiddled with some of the hobby supplies he'd accumulated over the last few days. Models of elfin war fleets in bottles, they were discarded half-finished. The wheel spikes he was going to add to his brand new red chariot, the one with the flames on, were laid in a corner with the tools needed to make the change. Dotted between them were various guides on fine grog, some curved sticks he was assured would be excellent for getting hard little balls into faraway holes. He had yet to fathom out why. And all of the paraphernalia that just screams, "Help, help! I'm getting a bit doughy on the middle soon, and I'm actually not too worried about it. Also, please check my hairline. It's the same as yesterday, right?" "Yeah, maybe." He made a hand gesture that implied he was really thinking about it. "It's complicated, though. Got the little goblin fellas off doing some dirty work for me. Gotta let the chicken lay the egg before you try and scramble it." Brandy was looking at him like he was speaking dwarfish. "There's thousands of orcs out there, Scully." He hated that nickname. "They getting bored. And you know what? I'm bored as well. You're all, look at this tiny boat, what's too small for anyone to use. And maybe the great battle is really in your head and not in a field." She snorted derisively. "None of it makes any sense, Scully." She slithered, in a very attractive way. It's just hard to describe the sort of slinking hip movement that propels someone of Brandy's physicality without using vaguely serpentine language. From the mound of furs, and made her way across the room to stand behind the warlord. With some effort, she put her strong hands on his shoulders and gave a few passionless squeezes. "Some orcs might start saying what you don't have it in you no more. You gone all soft." She tutted and ran her hands down his back. "Maybe my mother was right about you. Over the hill," she said. "And then a bit further, keep going till you see the thousands of orcs. Then the really tall one with nothing between his ears, that's Skullcrusher." He really wasn't following this very well, but the bit about not being capable had sunk in. There's very little more dangerous than being in charge of a large number of orcs who suddenly decide they don't want you to be in charge anymore. "You're not soft, is you? You ready to fight now?" The urge to defend himself, his brilliant mind, unrecognised as it was by other orcs, overwhelmed him. "It's a lot more complicated than that." He turned to look her in the face, sweeping his eyes as he did across the trophies of his victories. He was a legend among orcs. He knew that. He definitely knew that. His orcliness was in no way in question. "See them two little goblins what came, the ones what I sent away with a human and some guards?" She looked at him completely blankly. "I told you about this. About the little goblins. Fat one named Prig. Other one called... Oh, something. I didn't care about that one." "Oh, yeah, right." Brandy said it. She did not mean it. Skullcrusher ploughed on regardless. "Well, see, the goblins, they gone to talk to the humans' army. That's on the way to the big human warlord, the Emperor. So talk to that army about the peace, right?" He threw his hands up in a gesture that's internationally recognised to mean, "Hang on, I'm getting to the bit that means you don't need to shout at me about that last bit." "See, except it's not really for that. It'll take them a while to get there, on account that they can't make their own straight line like an army will. Well, then they got to talk their way in, and the human with them might already be dead. Either way, when they get there, they go in. They confuse the humans, get them on the back leg with all this talk of peace and stuff. And while they thinking we come in with peace in our hands, we then reveal we've got a peace in our hands." He waited for a reaction to his joke that he was pretty sure, after a beat of non-recognition, wasn't going to come. Then we smash 'em all with their trousers off. Brandy sucked on her own tongue for a moment. I don't get it. Can we just go? Skullcrusher thought for a long moment. It had been a few days. Perhaps this wasn't a bad time to rouse his troops into action, before they became disinclined towards his cause. No long game in them, he thought. All right, he said. Guard! He called the second word loudly. An orc lifted the flap of his tent and looked in. Do you need more of the sticky stuff what the humans use? It queried. No, not glue this time. Spread word among the camp. Arm yourselves for war. We're leaving at sunrise. The orc crossed an arm over its chest in salute and dashed off, filled with genuine excitement at the chance of a ruck. Skullcrusher turned back to Brandy, his enormous tusked mouth splitting into a grin. He'd gone almost all the way to proving he wasn't too old or slow to fight with the big orcs. Just one last thing to do now, then. We, got until morning, he said with a leer. Brandy smiled. The following passage has been omitted for a series of reasons. We'll list them here. The depiction of what goes on consensually between a pair of orcs with battle on their minds does not make for good bedtime reading. Or any other reading, for that matter. Come to think of it, why are you so keen on knowing about what happens here? Look, this isn't that sort of book, and even if it was, there's only so much a narrator can take. Look, we're going to switch perspectives now, and, well, you better sort your behaviour out, because this sort of thing shan't be happening in this story. End of. Yes, even if they are in love, which these two definitely aren't. Oh, goodness me, there's other places for this sort of thing. Look, we'll wait here, you go and do whatever it is you do. Back? Good. Let's carry on with the story, shall we?
Fantastic. Again, I'm loving the narrator's voice in this, and the concept of the story is just growing and growing. It's so fun, like conceptually funny and actively funny in the text, which is great.
Thank you. Bloody hell.
Yeah, that's really good. That is very good. The ideas in there are brilliant, and the number of little nods and twists. The hobby thing was very clever. I like that a lot. And they're slipping in and asking for glue as well as an aside to bring it back was really good. And smashing that fourth wall is it the end of a chapter?
Yes.
Yeah, so smashing the fourth wall there with the narrator at the end of a chapter is a really nice way to end it. And I liked. I mean, you can probably tell by what I was reading that before, but I like attacking the reader sometimes. And I thought that was really well done. That was really good. I really enjoyed that. It was very funny.
I'm glad that... Oh, go on.
I was going to say, attacking is the right word, isn't it? The interrogation of the sort of lewdness of the reader and the one-sided conversation was really extreme, I thought. I liked it a lot, though.
That came from it is a trope. I know we even spoke about this last time. The sex scenes do tend to come quite thick and fast, if you'll excuse the terminology.
Oh God.
In fantasy literature. But I just thought to make a point of saying, look, this is not the kind of book where that sort of thing will happen. So, if you're one of them, sort yourself out. Maybe the first time a writer has deliberately said, look, nip off and tug one out before you read my book. But...
See, I felt like you were setting yourself up for the narrator having to, against their will, describe something later on in the book.
Oh, that's a great... I'm writing that
good.
down.
Yeah, do it, man.
Oh, you again.
That's a really good idea. I like that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, some things that cannot be omitted are happening inside this scene. So...
Yeah. What do you mean I have to tell you? Or no, that's good.
Yeah. No, it's great. The concept of a mid-war crisis on the Orc is fantastic. I like because we've seen obviously the some stuff from the point of view of the goblins themselves, which have a very particular effect on your story. I think because it's such a powerful, strong bit of narrative with them. So it's nice to see it with the orcs. And am I right in thinking that we get to see some from the human side as well,
Humans and dwarves.
and dwarves as well? Oh, that's really cool. So I think it sounds like the project is going really well. I thought that sounded remarkably polished for something that's been written.
Yes, I was going to say that to both of you actually. That neither of those sounded like nanos. Now I'm not calling you both massive fucking liars, but they were both very polished for things that are written very quickly for Nano to get your workouts done.
Oh, well, appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess it's I don't know. We are in a bit of a strange situation where we know that some of the stuff that we're writing is going to be read out, which is something that most people that are writing NaNoWriMore don't have to deal with when they're writing. And I have found that it's tripped me up a couple of times. I don't know whether it has for you, Nico, when I'm just like, well, this is a section I'm definitely not reading out on the podcast.
You know, the biggest one for me, so I'm not writing it chronologically. I started writing it chronologically and realised that I was going to just sort of get bogged down if I did that. So I started writing, I'd have ideas for scenes later, and I started writing them. And then I thought, I've sort of just written all the key plot points here. So I'm going to have to start writing some of the filler, because otherwise I'm just going to spoil the entire book on the podcast. and just ruin it for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to double your workout so you can actually have ones to read out on the podcast to throw people off what you're actually doing.
Oh, I like that. Some dummy chapters. Yeah.
Twist endings. And then both goblins caught fire unexpectedly. Like, whoa!
Whoa, said the narrator. Just to really like change where the camera is.
Crikey, I know you're finding this nano thing stressful, said the narrator.
Yeah. Something happened in this chapter, but I was looking the other way. Yeah.
Oh wow, well done, Nico. That was good. I enjoyed both of yours. So thanks for reading. But so on to sort of like just sort of general stuff about the NaNoWriMore.
Just before you do that, I'm sorry, this is really bugging me. Rubik's Cube dildo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I sometimes you possibly have this as well. Things just arrive in my head and I have to write them down somewhere. And I've like notes on my phone or handwritten notes, whatever like that. So I end up with things that are not thematically related, little really weird little statements or juicy.
Yeah, I do that as well. I just didn't know if now I have that written down. Just so you know. So whoever gets to actually do something, oh no, that sounds terrible. Whoever comes up with an idea for how you're going to use the idea of a Rubik's Cube dildo, I'll give you credit if I manage to.
Excellent.
I can't finish that sentence without making it sound weird.
No. Well, I'll try not to sit on it.
Yeah, I will try not to. I'll try to sandwich it into something.
I'm just trying to work out if I could make hobbits work in this universe, because Dildo Rubik's Cube is a great name for a hobbit.
He's got a love of making things grow. Oh, wonderful. So, where did you first hear about Nano, Ross?
Wow, I honestly don't know. I mean, I've done it I think I've done it for 10, maybe 11 years. I need to check. I've tried it every year. That's the right way to answer that question. I haven't achieved it every year. I've achieved it most of the time.
Oh, that's wicked.
And I actually put this on Twitter the other day that I went on there and I discovered, let me just see if I can find it. I discovered when I went in there this year, because I don't normally look at everything, I normally just look at the word count, that the first time I did it, was 2011, and it was something called The Third Door, and I did it that year. Actually, I failed more years than I've achieved it. But I also discovered that one of my books was a Nano project in November 2012, and I only released that last year.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so but it was quite interesting to open it up and have a look. But yeah, I did it first in 2011, so 10 years ago, and I have no idea how I heard about it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was via Twitter.
Through the writing community on Twitter.
Well, in 2011, I don't know if there was a writing community. I'm sure there was, and I wasn't really very active on Twitter, but I was on there, and I tended just to follow anything that had the word writing in it somewhere.
Hmm.
And I probably stumbled across it that way because a lot of them will have been cropping up saying that it's NaNoWriMore and shouting about it. So I'd imagine it was that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
So you've done so for 10 years. God, it was a little bit. You know, when someone reminds you that something like 2011 was 10 years ago, you're like, oh God, it's life is really quite fleeting, isn't it? But yeah, so how many times have you? They call it winning NaNoWriMore, don't they? If you complete the word count inside the 30. How many times have you won it?
You have to ask, don't you? Okay. Four times out of 10, which is pretty weak. I mean, a lot of those are in the like 40,000s and stuff like that, where I've clearly just stopped adding the words. But yeah, only 4 that actually say it on the website that I've done it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, a lot of these are the same story in different forms, or set in the same world. In fact, looking at it through 10 years of it, there are, I think, 6 of the years are all set around about the same kind of themes, if you like, and only 4 of them are complete standalone. So I was like, I'm just going to give this a blast and run with this and see what happens.
So is
So
this
it's
actually where your Gloomwood books have come from?
not the first one. I think that the first one just, I mean, it took a long time to write. That was, so obviously, again, it was a long time ago. That was before I'd done Nano. So that was actually written, I must have finished that in 2011 and then done Nano afterwards.
Right.
Actually, just a break from writing.
Yeah.
So, but the second one, there are multiple attempts to write the second one on here. The first one, as I said, being in 2012. There's another attempt in 2015, another attempt in 2017. That's quite shocking. I should probably never look at that again because it's depressing. But yeah, so I like I said, it's about getting that skeleton down, and obviously
Yeah.
I wasn't happy with it multiple times.
Yeah.
So I just went for it again. The proof that I'm not lying when I say I start from scratch a lot of the time. But it's a really good tool, and YouTube got some great concepts there already. From what you've read today, it's a really good tool of getting that map of your story in front of you. Um, and that word count, as much as it's I don't really agree with the pressure that some people put themselves under for doing it, because it should be painful, but in the same way that doing something you enjoy is painful when you're doing it a lot, which sounds like a very bad explanation.
It's like
Um,
working out or something. There is
Yeah.
it is difficult, and you do put your body under strain, but you can see improvement, and you're working towards a goal. So
There should be endorphins. At
yeah,
least,
yeah, there are.
yes.
at least now and again.
You're hoping for the occasional kick in of endorphins. Yeah.
I did say to you previously, didn't I, Ben, that off podcast, so I can say it now. I'm one of those people who, when there's a deadline, something in my brain kicks in and it says, the deadline is approaching, do the thing that you've been putting off. And this magically sets me a deadline every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it means that every day I go, oh God, the deadline's here. So I might just pretend every month is NaNoWriMore.
Yeah.
To be honest, that's exactly how I feel about it. I completely agree. And there's a lot of us who work much better under pressure, and we will sit back and do sod all for months unless there is something going. If you don't do it by this time, you have failed. Um, Even if it's just ourselves and a website that says you haven't done your words or something like that, and it does make a big difference in terms of that motivation. Because it's very easy just to slow your pace more and more,
Yeah.
and then eventually start crawling, and then it stops being enjoyable because
Yeah.
you're not caught up by the I guess it's sort of romance of it, but the pleasure of getting the story out there. I think that's one of the benefits of it. Is it's so fast, you have to do it so quickly that you get to enjoy the story as it happens. If you
Yes.
slow things down too much, then it can become a drag. I think that's why I like Nano, because I have to write it so quickly. I don't necessarily know what's coming.
Yeah.
I think
That's
it's also
brilliant.
I agree, and I think it's also as you get to see it happen right in front of you, and I think there are identifiable milestones through the month as well that you find yourself, like we said at the start of the podcast, with Nico having now written more on this project than he's ever done on one project before. and these little milestones I find are really cool to hit. So the moment we write over 10,000 words on something, the moment you write over 25,000 words on
Yeah,
something.
you want your little badges. I want
Yeah,
my
little
badges.
badges. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like being at school again. Yeah, just little.
Absolutely suck it in for the achievement points, gang.
Yeah, yeah. All it needs is the. We were speaking to one of the people we have a little community of people that follow the podcast, and two of them are doing NaNoWriMore with us at the same time, and we have a little support group going. And one of them made the joke that all that's missing is the little Xbox achievement ping noise,
Yeah.
and then he'd just never be able to stop writing.
That would be quite a simple thing to put as an add-on onto Google Docs or something like that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Tiny bookcase programmers, you know what to do. So
Yeah.
yeah, like we said, we've got our little community, and welcome to it. You're part now. There's no escape. This is
That's
your
it.
life.
I'm locked in. Brilliant.
Yeah.
There's no warning, guys.
Bear trap.
But have you used any of the sort of official NaNoWriMore group resources before?
On the writers' resources bit, you mean, with
Well,
they do their little. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
of things there. They've got all the prep things. They've got the pep talks. Lots of offers on good software and stuff like that as well. I do not work for them. I'm just going to make that clear. It's going to sound that way. But I haven't used a whole lot of them. But I have started to try out lots more software than I used to as a brilliant procrastination tool. If you're ever trying to find a way to avoid writing and you've cleaned the shit out of everything you can, then start playing with different software to find out if it makes you a better writer. That's always fun. But they do some really good offers on stuff like that. So I mean, you don't get them anywhere else, and you'll find that you get halfway through a year and you go, oh shit, I really want to try this software. Like, I don't want to say any of them because I really don't work for any of them, but certain ones which are great. And you want them halfway through the year, and all of the vouchers and stuff are gone. So if you do want to try anything, I do say get them from NaNoWriMore while you can.
Yeah.
They're really good. The pep things, I haven't listened to them very much recently. I did before in the past, and some of them are really good, where it's somebody with experience and somebody who is making a living from writing normally, who can actually tell you why it's a good idea to do what you're doing and give you little bits of advice and tips and stuff like that. I found personally that if I listen to those, then I don't have time to hit the world count.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems with it, I think, is that encouragement is brilliant, but most of us are on such a limited amount of time
Yeah.
that it's get the words down, and everything else you almost want to look at it afterwards. But it is a brilliant thing. I mean, I know that. I mean, I'm a teacher, and I know that when I've been teaching for a lot of English teachers are getting their kids to do NaNoWriMore and stuff like that, which is quite interesting as well. So
That's really cool.
it really is a big thing.
Yeah.
I know. I think possibly where Nico is maybe going with that was you actually did try some of you joined one of the communities, didn't you, in the last week? I think it was a Discord community. They did like writing sprints and stuff. And it didn't go so well. You thought, I seem to recall.
With myself,
Yeah.
it's maybe it's just the way that I communicate with people, but I found it to be there's quite this common thing if you join groups and you find groups online of specific interests. If you don't get in on day one, it gets clicky really fast.
Yeah.
And I joined one at the start of this week, and there were already kind of 2 or 3 names that were already dominating the conversations. And I did my sort of hello, and I thought I'll ask a question because I'm not sure, and I won't say what question I asked in case anyone from that group listens, and you won't know who I am anyway. But I asked and was immediately told why I was wrong for doing something how I was, and I thought, oh, that's not really why I came here.
No.
I thought this was a group to accept that we all write differently, but has anyone got any advice or tips?
a lot of these groups, and the same in the writing community on Twitter and elsewhere, and I've never joined any of the nano groups because I've never really found one for that reason. I think, like you say, you joining a group when it's established for a while is very difficult. Joining a group after it's been established for 3 days is very difficult sometimes as well, for the same reason. But a lot of these groups are filled with people that spend a lot of time in the group because they want to tell everyone else how it can be done or should be
Yeah.
done, and they're not really there for anything else. And quite often, I suspect these people are not really doing any writing and spending all of their time telling other people how to do their writing instead.
God, that's a sad state of affairs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
Oh,
feel atted by that previous statement? Get atted.
yeah.
Write something.
No, get writing, I think.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, fascinating. It didn't sound like a great experience, but it's the perils of interacting with people in an online community, I guess. But
Yeah, what I'm saying is NaNoWriMore is brilliant, but people can do one.
and there are probably plenty of decent groups out there filled with people that are
Definitely, there definitely are. It's just it's harder to find them, and I do find that it takes a long time. I mean, I've been on Twitter for a really long time, and I would say that I think that I've probably only really found 2 groups in the last 6 months that I really chat to a lot. And even then, it's it's on and off. You know what I mean with those things. And to have been on there for must be longer than I've been writing for. Really, it's hard to find those groups. And I think you're quite right that unless you're there at the beginning, it's worth just being a spectator for a little bit and seeing if it's actually worth joining in, because you'll pretty quickly see what it's really like and whether or not it is a friendly group or whether or not there's that one person who really thinks they own the group, because that's quite often the way as well. So I'm really bitter about this.
No, it's
And I am. It's okay.
yeah.
You do fit in here, don't you?
Yeah, very nice, very nice. So we've danced around it a bit, but do you have any like specific tips for people trying to complete it that you found to help you?
Yeah, okay. I'm no expert at it, as I've just proven by the number of failed attempts as well. A couple of things. The pressure thing, if people are actually finding that it's putting a lot of pressure on them in a negative way, then just stop, because there's no point. And I've seen that quite a lot, where people are getting quite upset about the pressure they're putting on themselves. And it's silly. Silly is not the right word, man. I shouldn't have said that, but it's not meant for that. If you're having a negative experience with it, please just stop. It's not worth that effort whatsoever. But in terms of actually getting your words down and stuff like that, and I'm extremely guilty of this. I find it very difficult. But I did say before, you've got to just continue moving forward. Try really hard not to look back at what you've written before. Because even if it's terrible, you'll find out later. And by the time you've written 50,000 words, you're probably not even the same person who wrote the first few hundred. So accept that at the start. And a little tip that I find helps me, which I try to do, is I deliberately try to leave things hanging. If I can, I leave that so a sentence is midway through, which is really, really painful. It's really, really painful. But if you do that, then the next time you sit down, you've got to finish that sentence and you're already writing. So that helps me quite a lot. But like I said, it's so painful. It's the most horrible thing. But if you can do it, it makes it so easy to start again when you sit back in front of your computer.
When did you find out you were a psychopath?
What a ridiculous question. You always know when you're a psychopath.
You just don't feel it, I guess. Is the
They give you a little card when you're born. Just carry it with you at all times.
The problem isn't knowing when you're a psychopath. It's when other people notice that you've got to worry. That's the only time.
Or at least they have to worry anyway. So watch out, Nico.
Just tell them you're a golden god and get on with your day. You'll be fine.
Oh, wonderful. That's really helpful. So we spoke a bit about your writing process and also mentioned your books. But do you want to talk to us a bit about the Gloomwood books and anything else you might have out at the moment that people can check out?
I'm very awkward at this point of things, but the Gloomwood books are basically set in the afterlife. It's a version of the afterlife, because there are multiple versions of the afterlife, and this one is the Grim Reaper's afterlife. which he created so that he had somewhere to go when he didn't want to be Death anymore. And who ends up there is kind of vague. There is an explanation for it, but basically the Gloomwood books follow the adventures of a detective. In the first book, the Grim Reaper has had his head stolen, and Detective Blunt dies conveniently just in time to arrive in Gloomwood, and he's tasked with finding the Grim Reaper's head and other people's heads that are also missing, because the leaders of the city don't trust anybody who was already there to do the job.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so
It's a bit like Death Noir.
yes, that's pretty much exactly what I was going for.
Oh, brilliant! Nice.
So obviously it's very silly, and it's meant to be funny. I'd say it's meant to be funny. That's the intent.
Yeah.
Some people find it funny. The idea is basically it's very light-hearted look at death. It's not really about death. That's just an excuse to include the Grim Reaper because I really like the character, and it means you can mess around with a lot of the fantasy elements. It's a really difficult one to put in a genre because I'm not allowed apparently to call it magical realism because everybody's dead. And I'm not allowed to call it urban fantasy because it's not set in the modern world because it's the afterlife. So I get told more often what I'm not allowed to call it than what I'm allowed to call it. So I go with a fantasy noir to describe the stories. So the first one is, like I said, Detective Blunt trying to find out who's stealing people's heads, because you can't kill people because they're already dead. So their heads are all still alive. They're just missing. While still dead. It's very confusing when you're writing a book and you have to describe how people aren't dead, even though everybody's dead.
Yeah.
And in the second book, we follow Detective Blunt while he tries to deal with a living being in the afterlife who is causing havoc because he's alive and that shouldn't be happening. And he's in the form of a teddy bear. And so Detective Blunt and the Grim Reaper and a motley assortment of characters have to deal with the fact there's a living person in the afterlife in a teddy bear's body.
Fantastic.
And that's the second book. Yeah.
And so the first book is Dead Heads, and
Yep.
the second one is Get Ted Dead.
Yeah.
Which is great names. They've also got wonderful art. I'm just thinking about this idea of you not being allowed to call it various things. Would magical surrealism work for you?
Yes, that actually works quite nicely. Except there's very little magic, though.
About post-murder mystery.
Post-murder mystery? Yes.
That's good. I do like that. Yeah. It's a funny one.
You can see it's immediately caught our attention, so that's wicked.
We're in.
And people can grab these on Amazon, I think?
Yes, they're on Amazon and they're available on Kindle Unlimited if people are paying for that. It annoys me when people say it's free on Kindle Unlimited because that's a lie.
Yeah.
But it is available on Kindle Unlimited as well. And hopefully nothing's free.
Nothing's free on Amazon, baby. And Daddy Bezos gotta go to space.
Get him, Jeff. Oh, wonderful. And people can also find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I have a very strange handle. It is @InkDisregardIt.
You also have a wonderfully strange website as well, which I had fun perusing earlier.
You're you're in a special club now of about 3 people. Yeah. The website's quite fun. There's a silly little game on there and some comics and stuff like that. So if people want to check it out, it's silly. I use that again as a procrastination tool. So whenever I'm trying to avoid doing writing, I'll go and make something silly for the website or draw a silly cartoon or something like that.
I think it's really expressive. I had a lot of fun with it. So nice work. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating hearing your take on NaNoWriMore and getting your insights and hearing your work as well. Thanks for coming on, Ross. It's been great having you.
It's been really, really fun, guys. I really appreciate it. And your writing was fantastic. And I'm still wondering about whether or not your lie is about editing your writing.
Will it make you more upset if I say I wrote mine today on my lunch break at work?
Yeah, it will. I mean, if you want me to dislike you, you're going about it the right way. So.
Well, I'll make you an even better offer. I'd absolutely love to have you back. I'm sure Ben will agree for a proper
Yeah,
episode once
definitely.
we're done with all this nano nonsense.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
I'd love to be back, guys. I'd appreciate that. It was really good fun, and good luck with the rest of Nano. Just remember, try to, don't finish your sentences.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?